Marcus Thompson pushed his cleaning cart down the pristine corridors of the Galactic Research Station Omega-7, humming an old Earth song his grandmother used to sing. The wheels squeaked slightly against the polished metal floors, a sound that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat during his 3 years of service here. At 52, with graying temples and laugh lines earned through decades of hard work, Marcus had seen enough of life to know that respect came through actions, not titles. The research station floated in the neutral zone between human and Drake territories, a marvel of cooperative engineering that housed the galaxy's brightest minds. Scientists from dozens of species worked here, pushing the boundaries of knowledge in everything from quantum mechanics to xenobiology. Marcus took pride in keeping their workspace spotless, understanding that cleanliness wasn't just about appearance, it was about creating an environment where brilliant minds could flourish. As he rounded the corner into Section C, Marcus noticed something unusual. The normally bustling laboratory wing was eerily quiet, with only the soft hum of ventilation systems breaking the silence. Most concerning was the absence of the Drake researchers, who typically filled these halls with their animated discussions about particle physics and dimensional theory. The Drakes were magnificent beings, standing nearly 8 feet tall with scales that shifted color based on their emotions and intellect that surpassed most other species in the galaxy. Dr. Zyxthera, the lead Drake physicist, usually greeted Marcus with a respectful nod each morning. Her scales would shimmer with pleasant blues and greens when she discussed her work, and she had always treated him with the courtesy that many others overlooked. Today, however, her laboratory stood empty, equipment humming uselessly without its operator. Marcus consulted his work tablet, checking the maintenance schedule. According to his records, the Drake Research Wing should be operational, with 14 scientists conducting experiments on temporal mechanics. Yet the silence suggested something had gone terribly wrong. His years of experience had taught him to notice when things were out of place, and this situation felt deeply troubling. Moving deeper into the section, Marcus began to hear faint sounds, not the usual excitement of scientific discovery, but something that made his heart ache. Soft whimpering echoed from behind the emergency blast doors of Laboratory 7, the most secure research facility on the station. The thick doors were designed to contain dangerous experiments, but now they seemed to be containing something else entirely. Marcus approached the security panel and hesitated. His clearance level shouldn't allow access to such a restricted area, but the sounds coming from within suggested beings in distress. His grandmother had always taught him that when people were hurting, protocol mattered less than compassion. After a moment of internal debate, he tried his maintenance override code, hoping it might work. To his surprise, the system accepted his credentials with a soft chime. The blast doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. 14 of the galaxy's most brilliant Drake researchers were huddled together in the center of the laboratory, their magnificent scales dulled to gray and black colors that indicated profound fear and despair. These were not the confident, articulate scientists he knew from daily interactions. Instead, they appeared as frightened children, some rocking back and forth while others stared blankly at the walls. Their usual proud posture had collapsed into protective crouches, and several were making soft keening sounds that spoke of deep psychological trauma. "Hello?" Marcus called softly, not wanting to startle them further. "Is everyone okay in here?" Dr. Zyxthera looked up at him with eyes that reflected pure terror. Her voice, usually strong and measured, came out as barely a whisper. "The universe, it's too big. Too empty. We understood." She couldn't finish the sentence before dissolving into trembling. Marcus set down his cleaning supplies and slowly approached the group. His movements were deliberate and non-threatening, the same way he might approach a scared animal. Years of working around nervous scientists had taught him the value of calm presence in moments of crisis. "What did you see?" he asked gently, settling onto the floor at their level rather than towering above them. Professor Kethmorn, normally the most articulate of the group, struggled to form words. "We were researching dimensional barriers. Trying to observe the true scope of reality beyond our perceivable universe. The mathematics worked. The calculations were perfect. But, when we activated the viewing array..." His scales flickered between gray and deep purple, colors Marcus had never seen on a Drake before. the emotion they represented was clearly overwhelming. "We saw everything," whispered Dr. Nimvara, the youngest of the researchers. "All of it at once. Every galaxy, every star system, every planet. And we realized how impossibly small we are. How meaningless our existence is in the face of such vastness. There are trillions upon trillions of worlds out there, countless civilizations that have risen and fallen without anyone ever knowing they existed." Marcus began to understand the magnitude of their discovery. These brilliant minds had gazed into the infinite and been crushed by the weight of cosmic perspective. They had confronted the ultimate reality of their own insignificance and found themselves unable to cope with the knowledge. "We tried to process it logically," Dr. ZYX Thera continued, her voice gaining slightly more strength. "Drakes pride ourselves on intellectual superiority. We're supposed to be able to comprehend anything through pure reasoning. But this broke something fundamental in our understanding of purpose and meaning." Marcus noticed that several of the researchers had stopped eating, their food containers sitting untouched nearby. Others showed signs of sleep deprivation, their usually bright eyes dulled with exhaustion. The revelation had affected them so profoundly that they were neglecting basic biological needs. "How long have you been like this?" Marcus asked with growing concern. 3 days, Professor Kethmorn answered. "We've been trying to find some logical framework to process what we learned, some way to restore meaning to our existence. But every attempt just leads us back to the same crushing realization of cosmic insignificance." Marcus studied their faces, seeing intelligence warring with despair. These were beings who had built their entire identity around understanding the universe through logic and reason. When faced with a reality too vast for comfortable comprehension, their greatest strength had become their greatest weakness. "Have you contacted medical?" Marcus inquired, though he suspected the answer. Dr. Nimvara shook her head slowly. "Medical interventions address symptoms, not fundamental philosophical crises. How do you treat beings who have simply learned too much about reality? How do you unknow the truth of cosmic insignificance?" The laboratory fell silent except for the continued soft sounds of distress from several researchers. Marcus realized he was witnessing something unprecedented, the intellectual breakdown of some of the galaxy's most advanced minds, not from any external attack or disease, but from pure knowledge itself. Standing up slowly, Marcus looked around the laboratory at the sophisticated equipment that had made their devastating discovery possible. Screens still displayed complex mathematical formulas and dimensional readings that meant nothing to him but had apparently revealed everything to them. "I don't know much about cosmic philosophy," Marcus said quietly, "but I do know about taking care of people. When's the last time any of you had a proper meal or decent sleep?" The researchers looked at him with expressions that mixed gratitude with hopelessness. They recognized his kindness but seemed unable to believe that simple human care could address the magnitude of their existential crisis. "Sustenance feels pointless when you truly comprehend the temporary nature of all existence," Dr. ZYX Thera replied, though her tone suggested she appreciated his concern. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. He didn't fully understand their predicament, but he recognized suffering when he saw it. These brilliant beings had encountered something that challenged their fundamental understanding of existence, and they were drowning in the implications. "Well," he said with characteristic practicality, "maybe we can't solve the universe, but we can start with making sure you're all properly fed and rested. Sometimes the biggest problems look different when you're not running on empty." The researchers exchanged glances, their scales showing the faintest hint of warmer colors for the first time since Marcus had discovered them. They seemed surprised that anyone would offer such simple, direct assistance in the face of their cosmic crisis. "You would help us?" Dr. Nimvara asked, her voice carrying a note of wonder. "Of course," Marcus replied without hesitation. "That's what people do for each other." As he prepared to leave and gather supplies for their care, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that these brilliant beings had discovered something about the universe that their intellects couldn't process alone. They needed more than logic to survive their revelation, they needed connection, purpose, and, perhaps most importantly, they needed to remember that significance didn't always come from size or scope. The universe might be vast and indifferent, but, in this small laboratory on a research station floating between the stars, Marcus Thompson had just reminded them that care and compassion could exist regardless of cosmic scale. Whether that would be enough to heal their wounded spirits remained to be seen, but it was a beginning. Marcus returned to Laboratory 7 with a cart loaded with nutritional supplements, warm blankets, and basic comfort items he'd gathered from around the station. The security doors whispered open to reveal the Drake researchers still huddled together, though their positions had shifted slightly. Dr. Zyxthara had moved closer to Dr. Nimvara, offering what appeared to be protective comfort to the younger scientist. "I brought some things that might help," Marcus announced softly, wheeling his cart inside. The researchers watched him with curious expressions, their scales showing subtle shifts toward warmer colors, not quite hope, but perhaps a tentative interest in his activities. Marcus began distributing thermal blankets, noting how the Drake's body temperatures had dropped below their normal range. Their fear had apparently affected their basic physiological functions, something that concerned him greatly. As he worked, he maintained a steady stream of quiet conversation, the same tone he'd used years ago when comforting his own children through nightmares. "You know, I've been cleaning this station for 3 years now," he said while adjusting a blanket around Professor Kethmorn's shoulders. "In that time, I've learned something interesting about brilliant minds like yourselves. Sometimes you think so hard and so deeply that you forget about the simple things that keep life bearable." Dr. Zyxthara accepted a warm nutrient drink with trembling hands. "Simple things seem inadequate when confronted with infinite complexity," she murmured, though she took a small sip of the beverage. "Maybe," Marcus agreed, settling down among them with his own cup of coffee. "But I've noticed that even the biggest problems start feeling different when you're warm, fed, and surrounded by people who care about you." The researchers exchanged glances. Marcus's matter-of-fact approach to their crisis was unlike anything they'd expected. Where they anticipated complex philosophical discussions about existence and meaning, he offered blankets and soup. Where they expected analysis of their cosmic revelation, he provided basic human comfort. "We appreciate your kindness, Dr. Nimvara said carefully, "but our situation isn't something that can be resolved through simple creature comforts. We've seen the true nature of reality. We understand our absolute insignificance in the cosmic order. How does one continue existing with such knowledge?" Marcus considered this while watching steam rise from his coffee cup. "I'm not smart enough to argue with your mathematics or your cosmic observations. But I've lived long enough to know that significance isn't always about size or scope." He gestured around the laboratory. "Take this room, for instance. In the grand scheme of the universe, it's less than a speck of dust. But right now, it contains 14 brilliant beings who are suffering, and one old janitor who's trying to help them feel better. That seems pretty significant to me." Professor Kethmorn's scale showed the first hint of blue Marcus had seen since entering the room. "You're suggesting that local meaning can exist independent of universal scope?" "I'm suggesting that meaning is something we create, not something we discover," Marcus replied. "The universe might be huge and empty, but that doesn't make the connections we form with each other any less real or important." Dr. Zyxthara leaned forward slightly, her scientific mind engaging despite her emotional distress. "But if our entire civilization is destined for extinction, if our greatest achievements will eventually be forgotten, how can any local meaning have validity?" Marcus smiled gently. "Let me tell you about my grandmother. She lived through terrible times: wars, poverty, loss of people she loved. But she spent her life taking care of others. Cooking meals for neighbors who were struggling, sitting with sick friends, raising children who grew up to be good people." He paused to take a sip of coffee, organizing his thoughts. "Now, my grandmother has been gone for 20 years. Most people who knew her are dead too. In a cosmic sense, her life was a brief flicker that made no measurable impact on the universe. But she mattered enormously to the people she touched. Her kindness echoed through their lives and the lives of their children." Dr. Nimvara wrapped her blanket more tightly around herself. "But, eventually, even those echoes will fade. Given enough time, it will be as if she never existed at all." "That's true," Marcus acknowledged. "But, here's the thing, while those connections existed, they were absolutely real. The comfort she provided, the love she shared, the small moments of happiness she created, none of that becomes less meaningful because it was temporary. The researchers sat in contemplative silence, processing this perspective. Their scales began showing more varied colors, moving away from the uniform gray of despair toward the subtle patterns that indicated active thought. "You're proposing that temporary meaning can be as valid as permanent meaning," Professor Kethmorn said slowly. Marcus nodded. "I'm proposing that temporary meaning is the only kind that actually exists. Everything in the universe is temporary when you extend the timeline far enough. That doesn't make it worthless, it makes it precious." Dr. Zyxthera set down her empty cup and looked directly at Marcus. "Your species fascinates us more each day. Humans seem capable of finding purpose and joy even when intellectually aware of life's finite nature. How do you maintain such resilience?" "Practice, I suppose," Marcus replied with a chuckle. "Humans have been dealing with mortality and meaninglessness for our entire history. We've learned that if you wait for the universe to provide meaning, you'll wait forever. But if you create meaning through connections and actions, you can have a pretty good life." Marcus stood up and moved to the laboratory's main display, which still showed the mathematical proof of cosmic vastness that had broken the researchers' spirits. Instead of turning it off, he studied it with apparent interest. "This is incredible work," he said genuinely. 14 brilliant minds working together to answer one of the universe's biggest questions. You succeeded beyond what most beings could even attempt." Dr. Nimvara looked confused. "But our success is what caused this crisis. We learned something that destroyed our sense of purpose." "No," Marcus corrected gently. "You learned something that revealed the inadequacy of your old sense of purpose. That's not the same thing as proving that purpose can exist." He turned to face the group. "Your old purpose was based on the idea that Drake intelligence made you cosmically significant. When you discovered that cosmic significance might be impossible for anyone to achieve, you concluded that purpose itself was impossible. But what if you're wrong about that conclusion?" Professor Kethmorn's scales brightened considerably. "You're suggesting that purpose can exist independent of cosmic significance?" "I'm suggesting that purpose exists wherever beings create it through their choices and connections," Marcus replied. "The fact that the universe is vast and indifferent doesn't negate the reality of care, curiosity, friendship, discovery, or any of the other experiences that make existence worthwhile." Marcus returned to sit among them, his presence somehow both humble and commanding. "Look around this room. 3 days ago, you were strangers united only by professional collaboration. Now you're providing comfort to each other in a time of crisis. That bond, the choice to care for one another, is it less meaningful because the universe is large?" Dr. Zyxthera's scales showed definite patterns of warming color. "The connection feels significant to us personally, regardless of cosmic perspective." "Exactly," Marcus said with satisfaction. "And that's not a flaw in your thinking, that's evidence that meaning operates on multiple scales simultaneously. Your discovery didn't eliminate meaning, it revealed that meaning was never dependent on cosmic importance in the first place." The change in the laboratory's atmosphere was subtle but noticeable. The researchers were sitting up straighter, their scales showing more variety and warmth. Several had finished their nutrient drinks and appeared to be considering the possibility of eating solid food. "But how do we continue our research knowing what we now know?" Dr. Nimvara asked. "How do we maintain motivation for scientific discovery when we understand that all discoveries are ultimately insignificant?" Marcus considered this question carefully. "What made you become scientists in the first place? Was it to achieve cosmic significance, or was it something else?" Professor Kethmorn answered first. "Curiosity. The joy of understanding how things work. The satisfaction of solving complex problems," added Dr. Zyxthera. "The pleasure of collaboration with other brilliant minds," Dr. Nimvara admitted. Marcus spread his hands. "Did your discovery change any of those motivations? Are you less curious now? Do complex problems no longer interest you? Has collaboration stopped being enjoyable?" The researchers looked at each other with growing realization. Their fundamental drives for scientific inquiry hadn't actually been damaged by their cosmic revelation, they had simply been overshadowed by existential despair. We allowed cosmic perspective to invalidate personal meaning, Professor Kethmorn said with something approaching wonder. It's an easy mistake to make, Marcus assured him. Humans do it all the time. We get so focused on the big picture that we forget to appreciate the small experiences that actually make life worth living. Marcus began collecting the empty containers and used blankets, preparing to leave the researchers to process their shifting perspective. I need to finish my rounds, but I'll check on you tomorrow. Try to get some rest, and maybe consider that the universe being vast and mysterious just makes your small corner of it more precious, not less. As he reached the laboratory door, Dr. Zyxthara called out to him. Marcus? Thank you. We had forgotten that wisdom could exist independent of intelligence. Marcus paused in the doorway, considering her words. Intelligence helps you understand the universe, he replied. But wisdom helps you understand how to live in it. Sometimes the janitor sees things the physicist misses, not because he's smarter, but because he's looking for different answers. The security doors closed behind him with their characteristic hiss, leaving the Drake researchers in a laboratory that felt somehow warmer and more hopeful than it had when he'd first discovered them. Their scales were showing subtle but unmistakable patterns of recovery, and, for the first time in 3 days, several were discussing the possibility of returning to their quarters for proper rest. Marcus arrived at Laboratory 7 the following morning to find the security doors already open and sounds of activity coming from within. Instead of the desperate whimpering that had greeted him the day before, he heard the familiar cadence of scientific discussion mixed with something new: laughter. Stepping through the doorway, Marcus discovered the Drake researchers had transformed their crisis shelter back into a functioning laboratory. Equipment had been reactivated, data screens displayed new calculations, and the scientists themselves appeared dramatically different. Their scales showed vibrant patterns of blue, green, and gold colors that spoke of intellectual engagement, curiosity, and something Marcus was delighted to recognize as joy. Marcus! Dr. Nimbara called out, her voice carrying an enthusiasm that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. We've been hoping you'd arrive. We have something extraordinary to show you. Professor Kethmorn gestured excitedly toward the main display screen. We've been working all night, but not in the way you might expect. Instead of trying to solve our cosmic significance problem, we decided to explore a different question entirely. Dr. Zyxthara approached Marcus with scales that shimmered with warm golds and greens. We asked ourselves, if the universe is vast and indifferent, what makes small pockets of care and consciousness possible? How did beings capable of compassion emerge from cosmic emptiness? Marcus set down his cleaning cart, immediately understanding that something fundamental had shifted in their perspective. And what did you discover? Something remarkable, Professor Kethmorn replied, his scales practically glowing with excitement. The very vastness that initially terrified us turns out to be necessary for beings like us to exist. The universe had to be enormous and mostly empty for stars to form, for planets to develop, for evolution to have time and space to create consciousness. Dr. Nimbara pulled up a series of calculations that meant nothing to Marcus but clearly meant everything to the researchers. The odds against conscious life developing anywhere in the universe are astronomically small. But the universe is so vast that astronomically small probabilities become certainties given enough opportunities. We exist because the universe is huge, not in spite of it, Dr. Zyxthara continued. Our consciousness, our capacity for wonder, our ability to care for each other, these are incredibly rare and precious emergent properties that required cosmic scale time and space to develop. Marcus studied their animated faces, seeing a transformation that went far beyond mere intellectual recovery. These beings had found a way to reframe their devastating discovery as something awe-inspiring rather than crushing. So you're saying that beings capable of love and friendship are actually cosmic rarities? Marcus asked, wanting to understand their revelation. Exactly. Professor Kethmorn exclaimed. When we calculated the probability of consciousness emerging in any given location, we found it to be so vanishingly small that every thinking being represents an almost miraculous occurrence. But the universe is so vast that it contains billions of these miracles. Dr. Nimbara moved to another display showing a complex star map. We've identified approximately 2 million civilizations in our observable galaxy alone, each one representing an independent emergence of consciousness from cosmic emptiness. Every single one is statistically impossible, and yet here they all are. Marcus began to grasp the magnitude of their reframed understanding. You've turned your discovery of cosmic insignificance into proof of cosmic preciousness. Precisely, Dr. ZYX confirmed. We were correct that individual civilizations are insignificant compared to the scale of the universe. But we were wrong to conclude that insignificance equals meaninglessness. Instead, our tiny scale makes us incredibly precious. Marcus settled into a chair, fascinated by their transformation. How did you make this leap? Yesterday you were devastated by cosmic emptiness, and today you're celebrating it. Professor Kethmorn's scale shifted to patterns Marcus had learned indicated deep thought. Your words about temporary meaning being the only real meaning kept resonating with us. We realized we were demanding that the universe provide us with meaning, rather than recognizing the meaning we create ourselves. But, more than that, Dr. Nimvara added, we began to understand that our capacity to create meaning is itself extraordinary. In a universe that is mostly empty space and dead matter, the emergence of beings capable of wonder, compassion, and connection is almost impossibly rare. Dr. ZYX approached Marcus with an expression of gratitude that transcended species barriers. You helped us realize that we had been asking the wrong question. Instead of how can we be significant in a vast universe, we should have been asking what is it about consciousness that allows beings to create significance despite cosmic indifference. Marcus smiled, recognizing the familiar human pattern of finding hope in the most unlikely places. And what answer did you find to that question? Love, Professor Kethmorn said simply, his scale showing the deep golden patterns that Marcus was learning indicated profound contentment. Not romantic attachment specifically, but the broader capacity for one conscious being to care about the welfare of another conscious being. Dr. Nimbara moved to a display showing complex mathematical formulas that somehow seemed warmer and more inviting than the equations that had broken their spirits days before. We've been analyzing the mathematical properties of care-based relationships. What we discovered is that every act of genuine compassion represents a victory over cosmic indifference. The universe provides no inherent reason for one being to sacrifice time, energy, or resources for the benefit of another being, Dr. ZYX continued. Yet consciousness somehow develops this capacity anyway. Every friendship, every act of kindness, every moment of shared joy represents something that shouldn't exist according to the universe's basic physics. Marcus felt a warm glow of recognition. You've discovered what my grandmother knew without mathematics, that love is the universe's way of creating meaning. More than that, Professor Kethmorn said with growing excitement. We've realized that consciousness itself might be the universe's method of experiencing wonder at its own existence. Through beings like us, the cosmos becomes capable of appreciating its own beauty and complexity. Dr. Nimbara pulled up another display showing the galactic distribution of known civilizations. Every conscious species represents the universe developing a new way to understand itself. Drake logic, human intuition, Zephyrian creativity, Mulcari patience. Each form of consciousness adds a unique perspective to cosmic awareness. Marcus stood up and moved to study their calculations, marveling at how the same mathematical truths that had devastated them could now fill them with joy and purpose. So instead of being insignificant specks in an indifferent universe, you've concluded that you're rare and precious manifestations of the universe's capacity for self-awareness and compassion, Dr. ZYX finished. Every conscious being is cosmically unlikely, which makes every conscious being cosmically valuable. The laboratory fell into comfortable silence as the researchers contemplated their transformed understanding. Their scales showed peaceful patterns of satisfaction mixed with renewed intellectual curiosity. There's something else, Dr. Nimvara said quietly. Something we realized about you specifically, Marcus. Marcus raised an eyebrow, curious about this development. Professor Kethmorn explained with obvious admiration. You demonstrated something extraordinary when you found us in crisis. Without any understanding of our cosmic revelation or the mathematics behind our despair, you immediately responded with practical compassion. You saw beings in distress and simply acted to help. That's actually profound evidence for our new theory, Dr. Zyxthara continued. Your response proved that compassion can exist independent of understanding, that care can function without complete knowledge. You embodied the principle that connection matters more than comprehension. Marcus felt slightly overwhelmed by their praise. I just did what seemed necessary. You were hurting, so I tried to help. Exactly. Dr. Nimvara exclaimed. That's what makes it so remarkable. You didn't analyze the cosmic implications of our crisis or debate the philosophical validity of our despair. You simply responded with immediate care. That's consciousness operating at its highest level. Professor Kethmorn moved to the laboratory's central table where he'd arranged several small objects, a thermal blanket, an empty nutrient container, and Marcus's coffee cup from the previous day. We've been studying these items as artifacts of compassionate action. Each one represents a choice to prioritize another being's welfare over personal convenience. They're not much to look at, Marcus observed, though he was touched by their attention to such simple objects. That's precisely what makes them significant, Dr. Zyxthara replied. Grand gestures and dramatic sacrifices grab attention, but the universe's real victory over indifference happens through small, consistent acts of care. Bringing blankets to cold beings, offering food to hungry beings, sitting with frightened beings, these are the actions that create meaning. Dr. Nimvara approached Marcus with something like reverence. You taught us that affection, genuine care for other conscious beings, is the most powerful force in the universe. Not because it can move stars or reshape galaxies, but because it can transform despair into hope, isolation into connection, and meaninglessness into purpose. Marcus looked around the transformed laboratory, seeing how the Drake researchers had moved from crisis to celebration by learning to appreciate rather than demand cosmic significance. Their scales now showed patterns he had never seen before, complex swirls of color that seemed to indicate peace, purpose, and profound contentment. So what happens now? Marcus asked. Do you continue your dimensional research? Absolutely, Professor Kethmorn confirmed. But with a completely different motivation. Instead of seeking cosmic significance, we're exploring cosmic rarity. We want to understand how consciousness emerges from complexity, how meaning develops from chaos, how love conquers indifference. Dr. Zyxthara gestured toward their equipment with renewed enthusiasm. We're designing experiments to study the mathematics of compassion, the physics of friendship, the chemistry of care. If conscious beings are the universe's way of creating meaning, then understanding consciousness becomes the most important research possible. Marcus began gathering his cleaning supplies, preparing to continue his rounds with a light heart and a sense of profound accomplishment. It sounds like you've found your purpose. We've found our appreciation for purpose, Dr. Nimvara corrected gently. And we learned it from watching you demonstrate that meaning doesn't require cosmic scale, it requires conscious choice. As Marcus headed toward the laboratory exit, Professor Kethmorn called out one final observation. Marcus? We realized something important about your profession. Janitors might be the most cosmically significant beings in the universe. Marcus paused, curious about this unexpected conclusion. You spend your time creating order from chaos, beauty from mess, comfort from disorder, Dr. Zyxthara explained. In a universe trending toward entropy, every act of cleaning and care represents a victory over cosmic indifference. You're fighting the heat death of the universe one polished corridor at a time. Marcus Thompson left Laboratory 7 with a smile that would last the rest of his shift, knowing that he had witnessed something extraordinary, the moment when brilliant beings learned that the universe's greatest achievement wasn't its vast scale, but its capacity to create beings capable of caring for each other despite that scale. Behind him, 14 Drake researchers continued their work with renewed passion, forever changed by the realization that in a cosmos filled with empty space and dead matter, consciousness capable of compassion was the rarest and most precious phenomenon of all.